Okay, this is Psych 240, Section 21. There are two sections. One of them is a hybrid, or actually neither of them, but both of them are online. I'm going to explain. My name is Bruce Bradway. Here you go. I have a doctorate in psychology, and I'll be teaching the class with you. I haven't taught this. Actually, I haven't taught this class since 2017. I've been teaching all upper level classes, but I volunteered to take this over from Professor Barber because Professor Barber is working on his doctorate, and we're trying to help him get through it. So we're trying to limit the number of hours he has to teach. This is the syllabus for the class. As you can see, that's my telephone number. That's my cell phone number. I am not in Arizona. I am in Iowa. I am in a place called Lost Nation, Iowa. You can Google it if you like. There's not much to it. I actually do not live in Lost Nation. I live on a farm outside of Lost Nation. So, nice and green here. If you need to contact me, I will have office hours that's not right. This should be a 4. Wait a minute. Every day from on Monday through. Oops, that's not right either. There we go. Okay. Okay. So I have office hours every day. Monday 4 to 6, Tuesday 4 to 6, Wednesday 8 to 10 in the morning, and Thursday 8 to 10 in the morning, just depending on what you need or when you're available, just like when I'm available. Let's save. There we go. Okay. And desktop and save. Okay. So there are your the office hours. You can all you need to do is click on this right here, on this button right here, and that should take you to either one. If one of them doesn't work, try the other one. You never know how screwed up these things get, but one of them should work. There's the book we're going to use. It's Arnett, Human Development, A Cultural Approach. I think we're on the 3rd edition. Here's the ISBN number for the 3rd edition. If you have the 2nd edition or the 1st edition, they have frogs on them for some reason. Anyway, then that should be fine. This week we're going to tackle the first half of Chapter 1. Next week we'll tackle the second half of Chapter 1. Your discussion isn't actually due until next week. Isn't actually due until the 24th of January for this class. And actually the first discussion is just for you to identify yourself. After that we'll get into some more interesting things, but that's the way it's going to work. Instead of having big tests, what I'm going to do is have chapter quizzes. Each quiz will have 15 questions. Each question will be multiple choice. We have recently learned that multiple choice is a better way of teaching people than fill in the blanks. And it's because when you look at 4 different answers, you have to think about those 4 answers. Of course, one of them is the correct answer. The other 3 have to be wrong. But it takes more understanding to determine what isn't right as it does to determine what is right. So if it had something to do with fill in the blank, of course, you'd only have to think of one thing. But because it's multiple choice, you have to think of 4 things, and you have to eliminate those 4 things, or those 3 things. One of them's correct, of course. So that's one of the requirements. There will be 13. There's 13 chapters, so there will be 13 chapter quizzes worth 15 points apiece. And if you multiply 15 times 13, you get 195. So there's 195 as far as the quizzes are concerned. There is a library paper. It can be about anything in the book. If it's in the book, then you're free to write about it. I'm not trying to limit you at all, but this is a class about development, so, talking about, I don't know, Navajo ceremonies probably would fit. Well, maybe it would, especially if we're talking about death and afterlife belief. Anyway, so yeah, write it about just about anything, actually. There will be discussions. Each discussion is worth 10 points, and that adds up to 130 points. So for a total of 425 points, all you need to do is score 382 points and you get an A. So there you go. You need to take all your quizzes. You need to write all your. I'm fairly liberal with my discussion points. I'm just looking. I'm just trying to get you to think and to tell me what you're thinking, and that's really what I'm looking. There a lot of times, and most of my questions aren't questions with correct answers. They're just questions that I want you to answer. So I rarely count off. I never count off for saying something that I consider incorrect. I may correct you, but I want you to think. And if you showed me that you were thinking when you wrote it, then I will give you an optimum grade. Okay, so that's how you pass the class. You do all those things, discussion question, quizzes, and library paper. I think that's it. And there's what they're all due. Okay, there we go. And I probably have one with Dr. Lerma's signature on it. I'll put that up as soon as I can find it. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. That's what you do. Okay, anytime you need information, I have office hours Monday through Thursday, 2 hours on some of those days. If you have to work in the morning, maybe you can contact me in the evening. If you have to work, if you work the second shift, then maybe you can contact me in the morning. That's why I spread it out across the day. Okay, let's go ahead and get rid of that. Those are the 5 classes I'm teaching. I'm teaching Human Growth and Development, Introduction to Counseling, Cultural Psych, Substance Use and Abuse, and Advanced Readings in Psychology. So, as you can see, they're all mostly advanced classes. Anyway, okay, so let's go ahead and get started. If I can figure out which one to hit, there we go. Okay, now this is kind of interesting because we're talking about development, and of course, development begins with conception. Conception starts with a zygote. You're a zygote for 2 weeks. Then you're an embryo. Change to an embryo when you attach to the uterine wall. And you're an embryo for about, 8 weeks, and then you become a fetus. And so that's what it looks like when you are just a little bitty guy, just a bean-sized person. Birth to 1 month is you're a newborn. This is actually my daughter, and that's my grandson. He's 8 years old now, so this is kind of an old picture. That's the guy that was the father of the child. They were together at the time, but they broke up right after the baby was born. So you'll not see a picture of Reed anymore. This is Reese, and that's Roxy. 3 R's. Birth to 1 month is also referred to as being a neonate. One of the jobs that I had, if you've read my biography, one of the jobs, I guess I didn't talk about this. The job I had when I was in the service, I was a medical laboratory technician, and I used to work in the neonatal intensive care unit. Strangely, as you're going to see, if you look at this little guy's face, you can see he has a fairly distinctive face. And there he is when he was 1 month to 1 year. I think he's about a year old there. Here he is standing up, trying to destroy the television set. And there he is at about 2 years old. You can, and if you look back, by golly, he looks about the same, doesn't he? He doesn't change a whole lot. I think this is the last picture I have of him. There you go. He's about a 4-year-old there. He decided he wanted a pool of ketchup to eat his French fries with. Funny thing, what is we ate with them this weekend. They live just down the road about 30 miles, and we ate with him this weekend. And he doesn't eat ketchup anymore. But there is a McDonald's. He decided he wanted a hat, and if you go to Burger King, you get a hat. And he decided he wanted a hat, and they didn't have one, so he took his Happy Meal box and he put it on his head as a hat, as goofy as that is. Anyway, there you go, 2 to 4 year olds. I don't know who this is. School-age children, 6 to 12. Adolescents, you're an adolescent from age 13 to 20. I should have put a 13 in there. That's okay. That's a teenager. And then you're a young adult between age 20 and 40. And that's not me yet. Wait a second. You're a middle-aged adult from 40 to 60. I'm still not there. And then you're a young old adult from 60 to 80, and that's where I am. I'm 71 years old, I think. Yes, I'm 71 years old, born in 1949. So I'm 71 years old. That's me, and I'm still working, of course. And there's old are people who are over the age of 80. This guy has been arrested for something. I don't know what it was, but he's in a lineup somewhere. He's about 6 feet tall. That's a 6 right behind his head. Anyway, okay. Lots of odd things happen with development. Human development encompasses many different fields. It encompasses genetics. And of course, this has become important here lately because we're talking about genetics as far as COVID is concerned. It turns out that some people are more susceptible to a dangerous reaction to a viral infection than other people. Individuals with a certain type of blood, type A blood, are more susceptible to having an overreaction to a COVID infection. So there you go, genetics. It also changes, it has to do with your immune system. How strong is your immune system? And of course, there are all kinds of developmental problems that you can have. The picture on the right talks about thalassemia major. Thalassemia major is a blood disorder where the individual's blood thickens. It's too thick. And as you can see, if the mother has a trait and the father has a trait, then they will have one child with nothing, and they will have one child that has thalassemia major. Then they'll have one child with the trait. Now, of these 3 children, if the child isn't treated, they will die young, relatively young. This one will not be affected by their trait, and this one, of course, doesn't have the trait. So they won't be affected at all. So in the old days, before medicine was as good as it is today, this one would have died, and these 2 would have survived. It's the same way with a lot of different diseases. Sickle cell anemia is the same way. If both parents have the trait and they produce offspring, and they have 3 offspring, then one of them will have sickle cell anemia, one of them will have the sickle cell trait, and one of them will not have the trait at all. They won't have anything. Now the problem is that sickle cell anemia, sickle cell actually protects the individual. If you have the trait, it protects you from malaria. So in this case, we would potentially lose 2 of the children, one to sickle cell anemia and the other one to malaria, and then there would be one protected from the disease. But that, of course, is in an area where there's a lot of malaria. Sub-Saharan Africa, of course, has a lot of malaria. Not in the United States so much. We do have malaria down in the south to some extent. It's not nearly as bad as it is over in Africa, of course. Anyway, that's genetics. Molecular biology as well. This guy's actually a lab tech, and he's counting. He's doing a differential. He's looking at all the different blood cells, different white cells actually, and he's looking at the red cells to see. This person looks a little bit anemic to me. As you can see, there's a red cell, and there's not much red there, mostly white. That's anemia. That one doesn't have enough either. These are good cells. All these are good cells, but that one's anemic. Anyway, molecular biology, neuroscience, nutrition is part of development. Embryology, of course, how the fetus develops, and we're going to talk about that, especially I think this week, if I remember correctly. Medicine, of course. Doctors, nurses, lab techs, x-ray techs, all the pharmacists, whatnot. Computer science is part of developmental psychology. Cognitive science, understanding how the brain works. Psychology, of course, that's the class you're taking. Sociology, how do people get along in society? Of course, we had I'm talking to you on the 11th of January. Today's my son's birthday. He's 49 years old. I'm talking to you on the 11th. On the 6th, of course, we had the riot at the Capitol building, and that had to do with sociology. Why in the world did those people do that? Well, if you look at what led up to the riot, then it's fairly explainable. Gerontology has to do with old age, and as you can see, this is what somebody looked like when they were a young adult, and as they got older, they wrinkled up more and more and more. They lost their hair, and that's pretty much where I'm probably here. I'm pretty wrinkled up. But then again, I'm 71 years old, and you would expect somebody 71 years old to be a little bit wrinkled, at least a little bit. Epidemiology, this has to do with the vaccine that we're talking about. We're not exactly sure how long it lasts or how much it protects you. I was reading an article today that was talking about the Russian vaccine that is 91% effective. But the question, of course, is how long is it effective? We have two different vaccines in the United States, and the other question is how long are they effective? And can we get rid of COVID-19? Will it go away before those individuals come in contact with the disease? Cultural studies, of course, it's very important. Anthropology, which is part of cultural studies, except anthropology looks at cultures in the past as well as in the present. Philosophy. And if we look at all these pictures, who has a degree in philosophy? The answer is Steve Martin. That's a degree in philosophy. Let me let the dog out. Which answers the question, who let the dogs out? And the answer is, I just did. Let the dog out. Anyway, okay. Theology is part of culture. Usually it's part of culture, but theology is part of it as well. Linguistics, words that people use. Economics, history, and personally, you can. Not everybody has the same ideas, and most people don't have the same ideas as I do. But I think history is extremely important. When we talk about Sigmund Freud, of course, I'm 71 years old, and I have seen things change over time, and things do change over time. People's ideas change over time. When I first started in psychology, the major question in psychology was, should women work outside the home, or should they stay home and take care of the kids? This was a huge argument. I started in psychology in the 1970s. My first wife didn't want to work outside the home. She wanted to stay home and take care of the children, which was okay. And actually, we set things up that way. But then she decided to leave. So that was a fairly moot point. Since I got the kids, which is really kind of interesting. That's in my biography, I think. Anyway, but I think history is really important. My dad fought in World War II. I was in Vietnam. I have a brother that was deployed to Afghanistan. And I think these are all very important points. Um, Things change over time. People's ideas change over time. If you think about music, how has music changed? You know, you listen to an old song from the 1960s or 1970s. You know, it's all breakup music, but what are they talking about? People's clothes change. When I was a teenager, this is just an example. Women wore girdles. All women wore girdles, and so that they would look more slender. And of course, nobody does that anymore. And actually, pantyhose hadn't been invented yet, as strange as that is. But you know, all of this stuff is different, and people wear different clothes, and they're supposed to wear things. And if you watch a movie from the 1950s, everybody's wearing a fedora, everybody's wearing a hat. You know, is that important? Yeah, that's pretty important. But history, you know, people's different ideas. So when you read Freud, you got to understand Freud was writing his theories in the 1880s. So that was really very innovative at that time to even talk about. You couldn't talk about sex. My goodness gracious, that was something that you weren't supposed to do. So. Freud came up with his psychosexual theory because most of the people that he dealt with, they were sexually repressed because you weren't allowed to talk about sex. So you couldn't think about it. You couldn't look at it. They didn't even refer to the legs of a chair as legs. They called them limbs. They didn't want people to get sexually excited by the word legs. I know this sounds stupid, but they were talking about a sexually repressed time. Women wore clothes their dresses went all the way to the ground, came all the way up to the bottom of their chins. They never wore short sleeves. They always wore long sleeves. And they always wore gloves. My goodness gracious! So you know, sexual repression was a big deal at that time. And as time progressed, people became a little bit more liberal. We had World War One, then we had the Roaring Twenties. Well, anyway, I'm talking about sexual history here. I seem to be talking about sexual history here, but the reality is we need to understand. We need to understand the era that information comes from. Um, we can say that the Constitution doesn't make any sense because it accepted slavery, and you would be right. I mean, that was a horrible thing to do. But at the at the same time, you can't take you can't pretend that slavery never existed. It's in that historical context. So anything from the 1840s or 1830s, you have to equate that in. Culture, of course, is a total pattern of a group's customs, beliefs, art, and technology. This is a picture from a powwow in Montana. This is the Hayes powwow. You can tell from the mountains. The Hayes is in the Little Rockies, and there you go. The rest of Montana is pretty flat until you get over in the western part. This is in the middle, and there was a bunch of mountains right there, and they call them the Little Rockies. Population growth and change, total fertility rate is in a population, it's the number of births per woman. That's your total fertility rate. Of course, they don't all babies don't survive, unfortunately. Total fertility rate has to do with how many babies women have. In developed countries, most of the affluent countries in the world, it only represents about 18% of the total world population. Our 18% of the total world population lives in developed countries. About 82% of the world's population lives in what we refer to as developing countries. That's where the people that have less wealth than the developed countries. This is a fertility goddess, And as you can see, she has milk in her breasts, and has large hips so that she can bear children. So she is a fertility goddess. 2 reasons the United States follows a different demographic path than other people. Total fertility rate is higher than most developed countries in the United States. If you go to Europe, almost everybody's fertility rate is right around 0. In other words, they aren't having enough children to replace themselves. So they have 0 population growth. But the United States, we have our population growth is higher than that. The United States also has more legal immigration than most of the developed countries, and also has millions of undocumented immigrants. And of course, this is one of the things that got Trump elected, was the fact that he screamed about the undocumented immigrants and how we needed to find them and kick them out. And he wanted to limit immigration into the United States for some reason. And of course, this is a funny joke over here by Ben Sargent about what you guys probably were thinking when the first Europeans came over here. You know, it's just a joke. Projected ethnic changes in the U.S. population in 2050. Right now, we have about 310 million people in the United States. 65% are white, 16% are Latino, 12% are African American, and 5% are Asian, and 2% are something else. And actually, you guys are something else. You're something else. You're part of this something else, this other, in the United States. Now projected by 2050, whites will only represent about 46% of the population, less than half the population. Latinos will represent 30% of the population, and African Americans will stay right where they are, 12%, at about 12%. Asian Americans will increase to 8%. This has to do with immigration than childbirth, and then others will represent 4%. So this is projected for 2050. And this is one of the reasons why there's why we are having problems right now with white supremacy and whatnot. It's because white people are losing their power. In the beginning, they represented a relatively large percentage of the population. It was easy for them to dominate politics and everything else. But once they are less than half the population, they're going to lose their power. And this is one of the things that, one of the reasons why there's so much of a backlash right now. If you looked at all the people that were attacking the Capitol building, most of them were white. Almost all of them were white. Probably 95% of them were white. And that's one of the things that, one of the complaints about Donald Trump as president is that he attracts fringe elements. And most of those fringe elements that he attracts are white supremacy groups, which is unfortunate, I guess. Let's see what happens. 40% of the world's population lives on less than $2 per day. You can imagine if you only made $2, that wouldn't even buy you a quarter pounder with cheese. Maybe it'll buy you a quarter pounder without cheese, but it's certainly not going to buy, and that's only one hamburger. My goodness, how are you going to feed a whole family on that? 80% of the world's population lives on a family income of less than $6,000 per year. Developed countries, 50% go on to tertiary education. In developed countries, the United States, you guys are in college, that's tertiary education. You have primary education, you have secondary education, which is through high school, and then college. And about 50% of the population in the United States actually go on to some form of college. Developing countries, about 20% of the children don't even complete primary school. Now we're talking about definitions. Individualistic cultures or countries, their cultural values. They have cultural values such as independence and self-expression. The United States is an individualistic country. Most of the developed countries are individualistic countries. Most of Europe is individualistic. Collectivistic is cultural values such as obedience and group harmony. China, Japan, Korea, for those of you who are K-poppers or J-poppers. Um, if you're in love with anime or whatever, Bella Porch, who looks like an anime character. That's collectivistic culture. Now, the strange thing about here I'm talking about Bella Porch. Bella Porch is a Filipino, so she's from the Philippines. As we think we have discovered, we're a little. She's just on TikTok, but she's really, really popular right now, or she was last year. I don't know. I don't know what's going on right now. She kind of lost some of her popularity with all of her tattoos, but so long as she just shows her face, everybody's just madly in love with her. Traditional culture, rural culture that adheres more closely to historical traditions than urban people. Globalization has to do with increasing connections between different parts of the world. And of course, those of us who have been in the military and have traveled all over the world, sometimes unfortunately to fight, we are more likely to have this concept of globalization or accept globalization. A lot of individuals who have never been outside their hometowns, this is very scary to them. The idea that somebody from someplace else can make a decision and change your life. And they may not even have the same cultural values you have. They may not even be, if you're an individualistic person, then they may not even have individualistic understanding of what's going on. Worldwide variations in population, 82% of developed countries, and of course the developed countries are the pink ones, and the red ones are undeveloped or developing countries. I'm sorry, not undeveloped. So you can see all of Africa, almost all of South America except for Chile, all of Central America. Mexico is developed, Canada is developed. All the European nations. This is Turkey right here. That's Greece. There. This is Albania over here. And Albania, of course, is a developing country. All the countries in the what used to be the communist bloc, Eastern European countries, all the Asian countries are developing. All the countries in the Pacific, except for Australia, New Zealand, and oh, that's South Korea right there. This pink one right here. This is Japan. There we go. Okay, so those are the developing and the developed countries. Majority cultures, that's norms and standards. Right now, as we saw, the white culture is probably the majority culture in the United States right now, but it may change in the future uh, and we may have to learn Spanish. Not a bad idea anyway. Contexts are settings and circumstances. Socioeconomic status has to do with social class, including your educational level, your income level, and your occupational status. I am a college professor, and that gives me a fairly high occupational status. My income level is middle income, and my educational level, I have a doctorate, so my educational level is pretty high. My occupational status is fairly high, but my income level is relatively average. Gender as expectations of male and female roles. Of course, this is changing in the United States. Once upon a time, it wasn't that long ago, you either had to be a boy or a girl, and you had to, if you had the parts of a girl, you had to act like one. Of course, all that is changing with LGBTQ uh, two spirits. It's possible for you to adhere to a different mindset. Gender is not as, it's more fluid now than it's ever been in the past. I got a Christmas card from my niece. She has 4 children, and of her 4 children, it was really kind of interesting looking at the picture of her 4 children. She has one girl who has declared that she's a lesbian. She has a boy that has very, very long hair and paints his fingernails. I'm not sure if he's gay. She has a son who has a beard, and she has a daughter who wears skirts and has long hair. So it was really kind of interesting looking at the picture, trying to determine who was who. We know their names, of course. Hadn't been around them very much lately. So I'm not exactly sure who was who. And the only way we could pick out the boys from the girls was their chins, looking at their chins. Girls tend to have narrow chins and boys tend to have bigger chins. So from that, we determined that one of the long-haired people was a boy, was a male. Was His gender was, well, we're not sure what his gender is. His sex was male anyway, and the female had one of the females had very short hair with a very narrow chin. So it was really kind of curious, and it was interesting looking at the picture because I really don't care. I don't care, as far as I'm concerned. LGBTQ is fine. That doesn't have anything to do with me. It does have to do with society, and society sometimes will gauge you differently. But I tend not to be part of society or not adhere to some of the things that they do. I think they're too conservative. Anyway, there you go. Gender roles are very much more fluid than they've ever been in the past. Ethnicity, cultural origin, traditions, race, religion, and language. Your ethnicity would be Danae, I'm assuming. Worldwide variations in population and income levels. Developed countries represent only 18% of the world's population, yet they're much wealthier than developing countries. At what point in its economic development should a developing country be reclassified as a developed country? And this is a question that we ask ourselves. There are a lot of billionaires in the former Soviet Union, in Russia, and in China. And Japan. Well, you have to understand history in order to discuss why the Japanese have so much money or had so much money. And of course, we're borrowing money from the Chinese. Now with the pandemic, this may all change. So we'll see. Developed countries equal 55.4% of the world gross domestic product. Of course, we know that that's 18% of the population, of the world's population, represents 55.4% of all the products being produced. But 82% only represent 44.6% of the world's gross domestic product. Prevailing ideas of modern research in developmental psychology. One of the major arguments in psychology and biology are genes more important in dictating behavior than environment within which someone grows up. And this is the famous nature versus nurture debate. Usually when I ask this question, the real answer is both of them, of course, are very important. When I was growing up, I'm only 5'6". When I was growing up, I wanted to play center on the basketball team. Basketball's really, I'm from Indiana, and basketball's really important to people from Indiana. So I wanted to be the center. I wanted to be the guy underneath the basket, getting rebounds. But of course, when I play, I can't. And it may not be true that all white men can't jump, but I can't. I'm not much of a jumper. I'm only 5'6". I'm pretty fast, but I'm not a jumper. Anyway, that was not genetically. It couldn't happen. No matter what biology or what environment I put myself in. And unfortunately, height was really important if you're from Indiana, and basketball's like a religion there. So I was in the environment to be a center on a basketball team. But unfortunately, of course, the genetics weren't going to let me do that. Luckily, of course, I changed my desires, and I started running, and I was pretty fast. Ran in college, still hold records in the state of Indiana. So at 5'6", so biologically, genetically, I'm not. I am fairly athletic, but I'm not athletic enough to be a center on a basketball team. But I was athletic enough to win lots of races. Continuity is a continuous, smooth progression of developmental phenomenon across a lifespan. Uh, an example of this would be friendship that starts at Head Start, lasts into adulthood. I have a niece who married um, when she was in Head Start. She was literally in Head Start. And then in kindergarten, she and this boy pretended that they were married. I was really kind of odd. Of course, they're only, what, 4 or 5 years old. So it's not like they were trying to make babies or anything. But they pretended that they liked each other so much that they pretended that they were married. Well, they didn't see each other for, I don't know, they went to different high schools. This is in Chicago. They went to different high schools, and eventually they they didn't see each other. And then they saw each other at something. They saw each other, and it was, love at last sight, I guess. Anyway, they got married. Now they're married, and they live together, and they're just giddy that they found each other, and they were in Head Start together. As weird as that is. Anyway, that's known as continuity. Discontinuity is where there are abrupt shifts in development. Puberty and sexual maturation is such a discontinuity. While people grow from infancy to puberty, the change in adulthood tends to be fairly abrupt. And as you can see, these individuals there's quite a difference between this individual and this individual and this individual and this individual. And that's known as discontinuity. We do change from our youthful appearance. Um, there are situations where individuals do not develop their secondary sexual characteristics, in which case those individuals cannot reproduce. Universality refers to the same thing happening to everyone at the same time and in the same way. Puberty hits everyone at about the same time, somewhere between age, 9. Well, it's going seems to be going down, and one of the reasons is because we're so well fed these days. Um, I grew up in the 50s and 60s. They used to give us milk. They were hoping that the milk would make us grow faster. We were, of course, this was during the Cold War, so I think they were trying to make us grow big and strong so that we could join the army and fight in Vietnam. Of course, we didn't know Vietnam was going to happen at that point. But they used to give us milk. They had all this free milk that they gave us. I think that's what these Japanese, Korean, I'm not sure what those guys are. Anyway, okay, so puberty hits everyone about the same time, somewhere between 9 and 12 or 13 or 14 or 15. Ability to learn hits everyone around age 5 or 6 and lasts a lifetime. That's one of the reasons why first grade is, everybody's 5 and 6 years old in the first grade, all the way through high school. And usually, well, depending on the country, of course, we have 12 years of education, and then we get into advanced education. As you can see, all these kids, these are all first graders, I believe. And as you can see, they're all about the same size. Nobody's that different. Here we have different races in the same group. Wait a minute, where are they? No, they're all pretty much the same. Probably all the same race. This guy looks a little darker. Maybe he's Hispanic. Maybe he's native. Hard to say. Anyway, she looks a bit Hispanic. Maybe. Okay, these guys, these are what is this? Class of 1967. I'm not sure. It's a junior high class, though, as you can see. And all the boys and all the girls are about the same size. No matter what race they are, they all seem to be developing at the same rate. Here's a high school class for 1959. There we go. I've always found this to be a really interesting picture. This guy's got his arms crossed like he's different from everybody. Oh, wait a minute. This guy's got his arms crossed too. Maybe they were supposed to cross their arms. Here's a car that's moving past them, or a truck, I guess. That's interesting. Anyway, and there we go. That's what people are really supposed to look like. This was from a movie with Matthew McConaughey, and that's Tatum. No, that's not Tatum. What's his name? I can't remember. Anyway, yeah, I never saw the movie. Something about Mike. Anyway, they were strippers, if I remember correctly. And there's another high school. This is a college class, I think. They're all about the same age, and they're all about the same height, and everybody looks about the same. Context-specific development refers to the fact that differences in people may have to do with the environment in which they develop. This theory purports that there is a complex, intricate interaction between the individual and their environment that may change the outcome. And of course, these are kids that had to start working at a relatively young age. When that happens, you don't develop the same. When I grew up on a farm, I was fairly strong because I lifted things a lot. And maybe it had something to do with the fact that I'm only 5'6". Well, it could have something to do with the fact that my mother's only 4'8", my dad's only 5'7". But if you have to lean over and pick out good coal and bad coal all the time, at age whatever, 10 or 15, look, these kids look like they're 8 or 9 years old. It's going to change your trajectory. Factors of affluenza. Affluenza had to do with this kid got drunk. He's only 16 years old. He got drunk. He killed somebody in his car. And the defense for him was that he had grown up rich and he had no consequences throughout his life, and they called it affluenza. That's what the lawyer called it. This is his mom. Now, this gets really weird because this kid was going to go to reform school, or he was going to go somewhere. He was going to go to some juvie somewhere because he was just a real unpleasant person. And his mom took off for Mexico. She took him down to Mexico. Eventually, they caught him and brought him back, and he had to spend his time. But you can imagine what a spoiled little crappy kid he was. His defense was that he was a rich teenager. He was a rich teenager, and initially he was put on probation, and people had screamed so much that they retried him, and they gave him a harsher sentence. And his mother didn't like it, so his mother took him. She got arrested too, and she went to jail for like a year and a half or something for taking him out of the country. Scientists feel that there are 4 interactive forces influencing the way an individual is going to turn out. Biological forces are pulling on you. Psychological forces are pulling on you. Sociocultural forces are pulling on you, and life cycle forces are pulling on you. And I can tell you at age 71, the life cycle forces, as you get older, they start weighing more and more on people. I've talked to people, and they say things like, gee, when I hit 70, everything just went to pot. So life cycle forces don't really mean a whole lot to teenagers because you have so much reserve. You don't have to worry about these things. You're teenagers, you're young adults. You're at the peak of your life. You think you're bulletproof, and that's not true. You think you can do anything that you want. A lot of people, this is one of the reasons why they've legalized marijuana, that people think, well, they say that marijuana lowers your IQ, and people say, well, I'm so smart that I can lose a couple points without any problem. Of course, you smoke a lot of pot over time, and wow, that's I don't know how many points you want to lose, but that's just the way it works. So all of these things are pulling on you at the same time, pulling you in four different directions. Your biological forces, me being only 5'6", psychological forces, can I win that race? If I convince myself I can't win, then I won't win. Sociocultural forces, I grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood. That was pulling on me. We were running against wealthy schools. The whole mindset: can we beat these guys? They're richer. They've got prettier uniforms. They get new uniforms every year. They have better shoes than we have. Anyway, and of course, life cycle forces pulling on you at the same time. Biological forces, these forces include genetic factors such as height, weight, longevity, sensitivity to environmental factors, health-related factors such as being exposed to different pathogens or the consumption of toxins, such as alcohol, tobacco, drug, or drugs that might deplete one's immune system. Just about everything depletes your immune system. All the toxins do. So if you drink, you lower your immune system. Your tobacco does, and certainly drugs do. So there's always a probability, and of course this is what happened when COVID first hit. The people that were the most susceptible were the ones that already had pre-existing conditions. And of course, being an alcoholic was a pre-existing condition. Smoking tobacco, of course, this is a lung disease, and that was a pre-existing condition. And of course, depleting your immune system with heroin or crack or whatever. And a lot of those people died, and nobody quite understood what was going on. Or they didn't want to say anything because, we're free in the United States. We can do anything we want, even stupid things. We can do the dumbest things in the world, and nobody tells us we can't. Like what happened at the Capitol on the 6th of January. Psychological forces, these forces include the way that we see the world, our perception of things. It includes our cognitive capacity. How smart are we? We have a president that thinks he knows everything. The reality is that it's really difficult to understand everything. Most of us concentrate in a specific area. He thinks that he has this innate ability to read everything. I don't know if you remember in the beginning of the COVID crisis, he was saying that he should go and work at the where they were creating the vaccines because he understands everything. That's what he said, and obviously didn't, because we have really faltered as far as that's concerned. It includes our personalities and the emotions that we bring to our interpretation of the world. And of course, people have talked about, especially now, people are talking about President Trump's personality and the fact that he has a narcissistic personality. And maybe that wasn't the best idea to make that person the president. And then we had this COVID crisis, and he just couldn't handle it. Loses the election, and he won't accept it. That's part of his personality. Maybe not the best person to have as president right now. Sociocultural influences, sociocultural forces involve the world and the people around us, influencing how we develop our culture, our society, our ethnic factors that make us the people that we are. Life cycle forces, people change as they age. Life cycle forces will have different influences at different times of a person's life. For example, a pregnant teen will have different concerns than a woman who is pregnant in her 40s. This is kind of interesting because my first child, my first wife was only 17 when she got pregnant. She got pregnant. Anyway, I impregnated her. And of course, I'm this guy. I'm this guy right here. I didn't have the belt buckle, and I didn't have the Cubs hat, but I didn't shave either. It looks like he's never shaved before. Here he's got this little girl pregnant. And that's the way it was. I had, I was 19 years old, and my girlfriend slash fiance was 17 years old, and we had a baby. And she was born. My daughter was born on the 18th of September, and my birthday's the 12th of October. And I didn't turn 20 until, well, the next month. Yeah, about 3 weeks later, after my wife had the baby. But she was just a kid, and of course, things didn't work out as well. But then my daughter decided she didn't like kids, she didn't want kids, and then of course you just saw the picture of her. She was in her 40s. She was 42 years old before she got pregnant, and there you go. She's 50, 52, 51. She's 51 right now. Anyway, she's got an 8-year-old child. But she was an older person, and of course, there's dangers to this. There's not really that many. Well, there are dangers to a teenage pregnancy, but she's probably less likely to have any problems than she is, the older woman. Anyway, those are life cycle forces. I just love this guy's belt buckle. He wants to show it off. He's got his shirt tucked in so that you can see his belt buckle. You see this kind of stuff up in Montana all the time because they're all rodeo guys. So they've got if they win a belt buckle, they try to show it off. And of course, it's the size of a dinner plate. The first theory that tried to explain human development was the evolutionary theory of Charles Darwin. Darwin looked at biological processes and attempted to explain how humans adapted to their environment. Darwin felt that all creatures, including humans, must maintain a fitness for the environment that they live in or adapt to fit the environment. And this, of course, is something with global warming. This is a problem that we're all going to have in the near future. We've got to adapt to whatever we see. In August, the beginning of August, we had what they refer to as a derecho. Derecho is an inland hurricane. We had winds, sustained straight line winds of over 100 miles an hour. We lost almost half of our trees, and actually it destroyed a lot of the corn crop and a lot of the soybean crop. I live in Iowa, of course, and that's something we had never seen it before. There had been derechos, of course, in the United States, but not in this part of the United States. So is this something we're going to see every year? And of course, we have to adapt to that. We have to adapt to the more violent weather. This is, of course, a hurricane where the house has actually been swept into the ocean. Adaptation merely means change. It doesn't imply progress or improvement, and it may not be improvement. Of course, we're talking about global warming, and everybody's worried about the polar bears. The question is, can the polar bears adapt to a new environment? Will they be, and the seals? Evidently, there's not enough ice in the Arctic or the Antarctic. Of course, there are different kind of seals. Some of them breed on ice, but the ones that breed on ice, the penguins, are they going to adapt? Are the polar bears going to be able to adapt? What's going to happen next? And of course, this is a joke about Ethan. This is Ethan right here with all of his muscles. He's just not nerdy enough to be he doesn't have the genes to play video games. That's what these guys are saying. You got to be a nerd with a juice box, I guess. Maybe that's an inhaler. Anyway, you got to adapt. Everybody's got to be able to adapt. Psychologists today have adapted Darwin's theories into a field known as evolutionary psychology or evolutionary sociobiology. They see genetics as the prime driving force in social behavior. I just gave you some wrong information. Evolutionary psychology is one thing. Sociobiology is kind of the same thing. It's not evolutionary sociobiology. That's a redundancy. They see genetics as the prime driving force in social behavior. They do not discount the interaction between heredity and the environment. And of course, we're waiting to see how COVID affects everybody in the near future. They're talking about a lot more mental illness because of the isolation that people have to endure in order to survive. Some people can't do it. They have to be around other people, and they have to be around people that they don't know. They have to impress people. Are these people going to survive, or are they going to catch COVID and die? The long haulers. This is all brand new stuff. We've never seen anything like this before. Even with the flu epidemic of 1918, 1919, that killed over 6 million people worldwide, we've still never seen anything like this. Um, the flu didn't tended not to have any after effects. If you had it, you had it. If you got over it, you were over it, and you just went back with your life. But with COVID, of course, we're seeing effects from people that have lose their sense of taste. They have headaches. They've had headaches ever since they had it. It's affected them. It may affect them for the rest of their life. They may be completely debilitated for the rest of their lives. What are we going to do with these people? What's going to happen? How are we all going to survive? Changes in brain size in early humans. As you can see, this is an early hominid. His brain was only about 440 cubic centimeters. This is us. We're at about 1,300 plus. We don't have the biggest brains of any hominid that has ever existed. That was Neanderthal man. He had about 400 more cc's than we have. And this is another early hominid, 1,000 cc's. Neanderthal man had the biggest brain. The ultimate goal of all individual behavior and developmental change is survival of their genetic material. How do you survive? By shooting people, by beating people to death with a stick. All organisms adapt their behavior to ensure the survival of the basic elements of life. And of course, this has to do with how you reproduce, making sure that your genes survive to the next generation. Sociobiologists look at different aspects of social behavior to determine if it is adaptive. Is altruism adaptive? Sacrificing yourself for somebody else? Is competition good? Is socialization? Do we all want to be, is this type of isolation, is this really causing problems? Mating behavior, that's what this is right here. This is mating behavior. This isn't mating behavior. They're too young. But these guys are all trying to pick up on this one lady, poor thing. She has to decide which one of them or she doesn't have to decide with these three. But I mean, potentially she has to decide who she wants to be with, who she wants to mate with, because she is the one that is going to be carrying the baby. They may have different things on their minds, probably not, but they probably do want to mate, but they're not worried about 9 months down the road when she has the baby. I'm guessing. Or maybe they are, who knows? Maybe they saw her and liked the way that she looked, liked her healthy looks, so they decided that they would like to reproduce with this young individual. And of course, communication is another part of what sociobiologists do. Ethology is the study of how innate behavior and hereditary factors influence developmental changes. It's known as ethology. One example would be Noam Chomsky's language acquisition device, or LAD. It's a genetic predisposition to learn language to facilitate social interaction. And we seem to have that as modern humans, as Homo sapiens sapiens. We seem to have this ability to learn language. And it lasts until we're about 12 years old. Some people will maintain it most of their lives, and they'll be able to pick up foreign languages. Other individuals, it goes away at age 12 and it never really comes back. And that's one of the reasons why I don't speak Navajo. It's not because I don't want to learn Navajo. It's because my language acquisition device was filtered out of my brain a long, long, long time ago. Almost 60 years ago. Yeah, pretty close to 60 years ago. So the problem, I pick up a word from here and there, but the probability of me being able to learn a foreign language is fairly remote at this stage in my life. Another example of ethology would be Konrad Lorenz's work showing that inducing the mothering instinct in a species leads to survivability in the offspring. And what Lorenz did, he was able to get a fowl, in this case geese, to think that he was their mother because um, it, if you are close to this select individual or this offspring um, early in life, they will adhere to you, and that's normally what happens with the mother. These puma cubs or lion cubs, I guess it's a lion. Uh, they will will want to be around this individual, this select individual, the rest in order to be taken care of. Well, that's what happened with these guys too. Uh, he took them away from their mothers. He was the first thing they saw. It imprinted on them that he was the individual that was supposed to take care of them, and he was able to get them to follow him around and to think that he was uh, their mother or whatever, their parent anyway. Lorenz was able to do that, and of course that's what happens. That's one of the reasons why female bears are very, very dangerous if they have cubs. Any animal with offspring that are still needing to be taken care of, they're very, very dangerous. And you probably need to stay away from them because they will attack you, thinking, of course, that you're their enemy. An example of Lorenz's work is research that has found that when women are shown pictures of a baby, they have greater pupillary dilation than men do. Eckhard Hess in 1962 concluded that women may have a greater biological predisposition to respond to babies, and for that reason, of course. And uh, this has been going on since the beginning of human existence. Uh, Females of the species is more likely to want to take care of the offspring. I had a story about this. Oh, when I was living in Montana, I had a friend that he bred cows, and the cows that he bred, everybody was after these cows. They were having problems. Montana is difficult for cattle to survive. It's so cold in the wintertime. And what was happening, they were losing, of their calves, they were losing a third of them. And the reason they were losing them is because the mothers would, when it got cold, the mothers wanted to survive themselves and they stopped taking care of their offspring. They stopped taking care of their calves. So they were losing all these calves. And he was able to breed in, and they were Angus cattle. And he was able to breed in this desire to take care of your offspring. They had strong instincts to do that, and he was able to do that. He was able to get them to have this strong mothering instinct, and so he was able to sell these cows because they were. It meant that they would survive in a really difficult winter. Um, and he was making lots and lots of money, which was it was nice that he found this, and it's tragic when a calf dies. So it was a real positive thing. Developmental theories. So the first global theory was by Darwin, but the first psychological theory was by Freud. The first developmental theory, and he referred to it as a psychodynamic theory or the psychosexual theory. Psychodynamic theories view the individual as a solitary against the rest of the world. The first psychodynamic theory was Freud's psychosexual theory that purported that man developed due to sexual drives, and this was his psychosexual developmental theory, and we'll explain a little bit more of that in just a second. Erickson refuted Freud and said that humans were driven by social needs. Freud, of course, wrote his theory in the 1880s. Erickson wrote his theory in the 1920s. So he was after Freud. And there were a lot of people that argued with Freud. They said, "Oh my goodness gracious, how can you talk about sex when we're talking about little children? That can't possibly be true." And of course, Erickson was one of them. Erickson was really kind of an interesting person. Both of these guys are fairly interesting. Both of them were Jewish. But that doesn't really have a whole lot to do with anything. Well, it does, because remember, I told you history is really important. Freud, of course, lived through he was born in the 1850s, lived until 1940. Is that right? 1850s? Maybe it was 1860s he was born. Anyway, he was living through a very, very dangerous time. A lot of pogroms in Europe. There were a lot of people that didn't like Jewish people. A lot of Christians didn't like Jewish people. And they were in Central Europe. He was born in the Austrian Republic, not the Austrian Republic, the Austrian Empire. He was born in what would become eventually Czechoslovakia. He was born in a section that was right in between the Czechs and the Slovaks, an area called Moravia, and that's where they put the Jewish population. And the reason they put him there was so that they could act as a buffer between the Slovaks and the Czechs. They didn't want the Czechs to attack the Slovaks, and they didn't want the Slovaks to attack the Czechs, so they put the Jewish population in Moravia right in between them. So when the Slovaks wanted to kill somebody, they would come over and they would kill Jews. And when the Czechs wanted to kill somebody, they would come over and stop and kill Jews instead of run over and kill the Slovaks because they were Christians, and it was known as the Holy Roman Empire, and so of course they were Catholic. So it was a very, very difficult time. Jewish people um, had to educate themselves. Freud's story it gets really interesting. I don't think I'm going to talk about it right now, but Freud. Uh, Evidently, Freud had a lot of sexual repression. A lot of people had sexual repression at this time, and he came up with his theory. Anyway, he was dealing with a repressed society, and in that repressed society, of course, were a lot of sexually repressed individuals. Females weren't allowed to think about sex, but males, of course, could. Males, there were no rules about males, but there were lots and lots of rules about females. So he grew up, or he developed his theory at this time. Because of a lot of sexual repression in the late 19th century, early 20th century. Erickson, on the other hand, and actually Erickson worked with Freud's daughter. Freud only worked with adults. Anna Freud was his daughter, and she worked with children. Erickson started out in Germany. He was born, I was stationed at Ramstein, and my wife is stationed at Zweibrücken. And in that area is a principality known as Karlsruhe. It's actually a city. It's a city, and that's where he was born. He was born in Karlsruhe, Germany. And he was Jewish. His mother was Jewish. She looked Jewish. She had dark hair. She had fairly thick hair, kind of a darker complexion. She was Jewish. She had an affair with a Danish sea captain who was blonde-haired and blue-eyed, of course. And when Eric came out, he was blonde-headed and blue-eyed, just like his dad. Of course, she didn't tell anybody this, and so when the people first saw him, they said, "Wait a minute, come on! This Jewish lady just had this German-looking kid." So Erickson's problem, and actually his name wasn't Erickson at the time, and it wasn't the name that he took later. She eventually married, she was married to somebody else at the time. She was having an affair with the Danish sea captain. She got pregnant by him. As soon as he saw the kid, he divorced her. Didn't want to have anything to do with her. So while Erickson was young, she married his pediatrician. She met and married his pediatrician, who was a Jewish individual, and of course he looked just like his. He was Jewish, so he looked Jewish. So here we have a Jewish-looking mother, Jewish-looking father, and then we have Eric, who looks like a German kid, is what he looked like. So he grew up he grew up with conflict, social conflict. He was rejected by Jewish people because he looked German. He was rejected by Germans because he was Jewish. So he lived an isolated life. Did very well in high school. About the time he was 16 years old, he thought his father was the man that his mother was married to when he was born. But as it turned out, of course, at age 16, just before he graduated from high school, his mother told him that no, your father was a Danish sea captain. And he got so incensed that kind of flipped out and quit school and took off looking for his father. And he went to all the seaports and looking for his Danish father. Never found him, but he ended up in Italy. And he started working at the first Montessori school. And he learned about kids. He learned how to take care of kids. Learned about their psychology. So then he went to Vienna, and Anna Freud asked him to come to Vienna, and she hired him to work with the children because he was a teacher. He was a Montessori, and he taught that type of schooling. And at that point, of course, Freud he started understanding what Freud was talking about. And he didn't agree, of course, because in his life, societies, the social aspect was the most important thing. In Freud's life, of course, he had all this sexual repression, and his personal repression came from the fact that he was sexually attracted to his mother. I didn't tell you this story, this part of the story. Freud's mother she was 16, and Freud's father was 50 when he married this 16-year-old girl. He had already produced another family, and his wife had died, so he married this 16-year-old girl. This 50-year-old man marries a 16-year-old girl. Well, of course, because of the society that they lived in, he couldn't pay a lot of attention to her. But he, of course, did impregnate her, and his first child was Sigmund Freud. So here we have this 16, 17-year-old girl who has this little baby, and she's got a husband that won't pay any attention to her, so she puts all of her affection and love into her child, and she spoils the little kid. She goes ahead and has five more children, but Freud, of course, is her favorite. And she treats him like a golden child. He's the oldest one. He's a special one. So he developed this need to be wanted by his mother. And of course, since his father wasn't paying any attention to his mother threw all of her love onto the kid. I'm not saying there was anything sexual. This was all psychological, of course. It was all in his mind. It was in her mind because of her emotional needs. And eventually, of course, he became Sigmund Freud, this relatively narcissistic individual who thought that because his mother treated him this way, that he was better than everybody else, and the whole thing. And of course, if you read Freud, then you see this in a lot of his writing. but he didn't understand. He understood sexual repression, but he didn't realize that he was also sexually repressed. So one night he had a dream about his mother, and he was burying his mother, and he was wearing a headdress like they wore in Egypt, and she was on the bier, which is where you put your dead people so that they can be observed. It's a bier, and he was one of the guards or one of the individuals that carried her casket, and he was wearing this hawk's head, and from that he realized that he had this interesting sexual desire for his mother's affection, and that's where the psychosexual theory came from. Okay, so here we have Freud that went through what he went through, and because it had to do with sex, that he developed the psychosexual theory, and then we have Erickson who went through what he went through, and so we had the psychosocial theory. Now, the interesting thing about Erickson was that his name wasn't Erik Erikson. His name was Homburger was his last name. I can't remember his first name. Anyway, he was asked, or he was fleeing from the Nazis. Both Freud and Erickson had to leave Vienna when the Nazis took over. Freud went to England, and Erickson came to the United States, and he had all these people that were saying, "Oh, we've read all your stuff, and we think you're brilliant. Will you come and work at Harvard, Stanford, Yale?" Everybody was asking him to come over, and of course, his name was Homburger at the time. And while he was on the boat coming to the United States, he decided that he would name himself. And since he had no father, he didn't have to worry about that aspect of it. The doctor wasn't his father. The man who was married to his mother at the time wasn't his father. So he became Eric, son of himself, Erik Erikson, and that's why his name is Erik Erikson. As curious as that is, long story to explain why they came up with these theories. Okay, let me put my glasses on so I can actually see what I'm looking at. The interesting thing is they both came up with developmental theories. And the first stage of Freud's psychosexual theory was the oral stage. He realized that in order for a child to survive, they needed to focus all their desires on their mouths, because if they didn't drink their mother's milk, they would starve to death. So his first psychosexual stage was the oral stage. Erickson, of course, had worked with Freud, or had worked with Freud's daughter. He made his stage exactly the same, but in his case, it was a social crisis that took place. In his psychosocial theory, it was trust versus mistrust that must be resolved at birth. They either trust the person to be there, or they don't trust them to be there. So it was oral stage as far as Freud was concerned. It was trust versus mistrust as far as Erickson was concerned. So as kids grow up, they get to be about 2 years old, 18 months to 2 years old, and they have to potty train. They have to become socially acceptable. So the second stage for Freud was the anal stage. You need to be aware of when you're pooping, was the idea. And it took place between age 1 and 3. They have to focus on potty training to become a responsible member of society. As far as Erickson was concerned, the child needs to potty train, just like Freud said. But the reason he thought they did was so that they would gain autonomy. They would be able to take care of themselves. And if they didn't, they would feel shame because they weren't able to control their bowel movements. They needed to become an independent person, and of course that has to do with autonomy, has to do with potty training. So the third stage, as far as Freud was concerned, was when you realize that you're a boy or a girl, and this takes place between the age 3 and age 6. It's known as the Phthalic Stage, as far as Freud is concerned, when a little boy realizes that his penis is different from a little girl's vagina. And a little girl, of course, realizes that her vagina is not the same thing as a penis. Now, at the time, of course, Freud. This was back in the beginning of the end of the 19th century. It was a male-dominated society, and so Freud was looking at the little boys more than he was looking at the little girls, and he said little girls wanted to be little boys, and that's was known as penis envy. And because of that, a lot of people reject Freud. There's no research to show that any of this is true. Of course, he was a neurobiologist. He was a brain surgeon. So initially he was a doctor and he was a brain surgeon. Then he became a psychologist. So, he's looking at all these things and he's thinking in terms of males. So he got and that's one of the reasons why people reject him today. The third crisis in the psychosocial theory is initiative versus guilt. When the child learns to try new things or they don't because their parents won't allow them to. If they do, they develop, as in the second stage, they need to develop autonomy. In the third stage, they need to develop initiative. And of course, that is the crisis that takes place. Will they be independent or will they not be independent? If they don't, they'll feel shame and guilt. And they need to develop initiative. Now they're going to go to school. Fourth stage, of course, as far as sex is concerned, nothing's going on first grade. If you've ever been around first graders to fifth graders, nothing's going on with them as far as sex is concerned. They don't even understand what it's all about. They think they urinate out of those parts. So Freud referred to the fourth stage as a latency stage. Nothing's going on. They're latent. Something's going to happen, but hasn't happened yet. The next crisis, as far as Erickson was concerned, was industry versus inferiority. They've gone to school. They either try to compete with everybody or they feel inferior. So this has to do with first through the fifth grade. Freud's last stage is the genital stage, when the individual emerges as a reproductive being. And this happens as soon as they go through puberty, as far as he's concerned. And that's it. After that, they're a reproductive human being until they can't reproduce anymore, and then it's all over with. Erickson's adolescent crisis that he saw at this adolescent stage, was identity versus identity confusion. This is when teenagers try to discover who they want to be in life. Do they want to be goth? Do they want to be K-pop? Do they want to be hip-hop? Do they want to be whatever? Do they want to be a neuroscientist? Do they want to be a pothead? They're trying all of these different persona on to see what they want to be. Of course, the psychosocial theory continues throughout the rest of the individual's life. Erickson's next crisis faces the question of marriage or bachelorhood, intimacy versus isolation. The middle adulthood crisis that Erickson feels that people go through is generativity versus stagnation. During this crisis, the individual has to decide whether to help and mentor the younger generation or maintain a selfish lifestyle. I hate my job, that's what that says. Or do they want to help people? And of course, that's in middle adulthood. Erickson's crisis continues right to the end of life. The last crisis an individual faces is integrity versus despair. Does one see one's life as satisfactory, or do they see it as a failure? We're going to stop right here. And the reason we're going to stop right here is that I'm running out of time. I have to start my office hours. I'll pick this up next week, or maybe I'll just pick it up later on. But I have to stop this right now because my office hours need to start right now.